Hey guys, so it has been so long since I've done like a formal review of me like going to the movie theater and then doing a sit-down review of just the one movie with spoilers and a breakdown and everything. I really miss doing that. I miss movie theaters in general. Like, I am really feeling that. It has been, I don't even know how many days and months since going to a movie theater. So I'm thinking about doing that again here soon. I'm thinking of Ending Things is coming out on Netflix. Well, it's out today on Netflix, but I'm gonna watch it with a couple friends on Netflix party. So we're gonna be doing that on Monday. So I can't review it yet, but I think I'm gonna do like a formal singular review for movies that are coming up here soon on video on demand or on Netflix or whatever. But today we're going to be doing another one of these what I've been watching lately videos where I sit down and review 4 different horror movies. So today we're going to be talking about Host, What Keeps You Alive, 1BR, and Deerskin. I will have timestamps linked down below for each review if you just want to jump around. But first I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of different types of classes, from graphic design to video editing to creative arts like creative writing or even filmmaking. Skillshare is completely ad-free and a great way to add a little bit more productivity to our days, or a little bit more structure, or just fueling our hobbies by taking creative courses. I do think it's really important to highlight the fact that we should also be focusing on creative hobbies that don't make us money or aren't considered productive in any way, because making something for the sake of creating something is productive in itself if it's something that you enjoy. So make sure you're doing that as well and not obsess over productivity right now. A class I recently discovered is called Drawing as Self-Discovery: 5 Ways to Start by Mari Andrew, and she basically talks about using art and drawing and doodling as a way of journaling and working through emotions and healing, which I really need right now. So the first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get 2 months of premium membership on Skillshare for free. After that, it's only around $10 a month. Okay, so the first movie we're going to start with is Host, and this came out this year, obviously, because it is pandemic themed. It is quarantine themed. It was recently released to Shudder, and it got a lot of hype right away because it is the first movie, I think, to address the pandemic in a movie, and it was completely filmed in quarantine and filmed during the pandemic. I hope I didn't say pandemic too many times where I get demonetized, because that's like a bad word. It does have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think impressed a lot of people. I personally don't really use critic scores or anything like that, but if that's something that matters to you, it's got 100%, which is amazing. So this is a supernatural movie that follows a group of friends on a Zoom call after one of them hires a medium to do a virtual seance. After one of the friends mocks the experience, an evil entity starts invading their homes. I'm really surprised that we actually got a horror movie during the pandemic and that we got a pandemic themed horror movie this fast. Like, I knew they were coming, obviously. There's so much you could do with quarantine and just the pandemic in general, like the concept. It's been done before, but not, you know, about the COVID pandemic. So I was really surprised that we had this fast of a turnaround of a horror movie that was filmed completely in quarantine. All the actors were directed remotely and had to learn how to do their own stunts and practical effects, which I think is amazing. That must have been such a fun experience. Like, I'm so jealous. I'm not even an actor, but that would have been such a cool experience to be in your own home and then be directed for a popular movie that becomes successful, and then you get to learn your own stunts and practical effects to use, and like, how amazing is that? That'd be so much fun. So this was a scripted movie, obviously, but the actors were able to improvise, so a lot of it was them reacting to each other and kind of winging it, and some of the script was actually redacted from the actors so they wouldn't necessarily know what to expect next. Now, initially I went into this with a little bit of low expectations because I heard the concept and it was filmed so quickly that I was like, and edited together so quickly. Usually movies are filmed within like a month or so, but for it to be produced and edited and everything in such a short time period, I kind of had low expectations. Also, it was filmed over video chat, which, as we all know, has been done before. I can't talk about Host without bringing up Unfriended. So I was expecting it to go a little bit more to the Unfriended realm where it's a little bit cheesy. And I think honestly Host is what Unfriended should have been. I mean, I still love and appreciate Unfriended for what it is, but I think Host is what it tried to be. I think Host was much more intense of a movie and more suspenseful, even though technically you see a little bit less in Host than you do Unfriended. I think it was still a more effective horror movie. Now, Unfriended had more gore than Host. They didn't really show too much because, like I said, they had to rely on doing their own practical effects. But I still think Host is a scarier movie. And honestly, I would kind of describe Host as Unfriended meets Paranormal Activity, which might not sell you on this movie at all, but it's like the best parts of both of those movies coming together and creating Host. I know a lot of people don't like Unfriended and a lot of people don't like Paranormal Activity, so that probably is not convincing at all, but trust me, it is honestly the best of both worlds. Now, obviously, if you're not a fan of found footage, this is technically considered found footage because it's filmed over computer screens, then you might not enjoy this. Also, it's supernatural, so if you're not into that, then there were moments of frustration when I was watching it because of the camera angles. You want to see more, but of course they can't give you more because they're working with a limited budget and not a lot of special effects. So I understand why they didn't want to show too much, especially because if you show too much, it could take away a lot of the suspense as well. But Host does have that frustrating found footage effect where you're just like dying to see more in frame and you just can't. I think some of the foreshadowing was a little bit on the nose and a little bit too predictable, and I do wish some of the shots were a little bit different, but generally I really enjoyed this movie, and for what they had to work with and also filming during quarantine, I think this movie is phenomenal. Next up, we're going to talk about What Keeps You Alive. This is actually a 2018 movie, but was just recently released to Netflix, so it's gained kind of a little bit of online hype lately. I mentioned it briefly in my last video of horror movies that you've never heard of when I talked about It Stains the Sands Red, because Colin Minihan also made What Keeps You Alive. He, of course, is half of the Vicious brothers who brought us Grave Encounters, in case you needed a reminder again. So What Keeps You Alive follows a couple who are celebrating their 1-year anniversary at a secluded cabin in the woods. Jules soon learns of Jackie's dark side and is now pitted against her in the fight to survive. As the description suggests, this movie is a survival horror movie set in the woods, so it can get a little bit tropey. There's a couple of those tropes within this movie, and that does mean that some of this movie is pretty predictable, but overall I still really enjoyed this movie. It is an entertaining movie. This also stars Brittany Allen, who, as I mentioned before in my previous video, is in It Stains the Sands Red. She is dating Colin, who made this movie, so yeah, she's cast in a lot of his movies, and I think she honestly carried this movie. She is such a great actress and she portrays fear so well and in such a way that is so believable, like even just on her face. She also composed the score for this movie, which I think is pretty cool. So this movie does kind of jump right into the action. It doesn't spend too long on anyone's backstory, but I think it is just enough to feel sympathy for Jules' character. Given that it's not a boring movie, it maintains momentum throughout. I know I said that this movie could be pretty predictable because it's set in the woods. It's survival, kind of traditional survival horror in the woods, but there are actually many twists and turns throughout this movie that some are expected and some aren't, and I think it adds a nice surprise throughout. I think Netflix kind of does a disservice for this movie though with their autoplay, what scene they chose for the autoplay, because obviously it kind of it's not like a spoiler necessarily because it happens at the beginning of the movie, but it is like the major plot point and kind of first twist that we see is in the Netflix autoplay like preview. So that's kind of annoying. It might be seen as a little bit unrealistic. It is still like a realistic type horror movie, but the storyline, some of the twists are like a little, you know, not super great and might be a little bit unpredictable. Might be one or two too many twists in this movie, but generally the gore is done really well, it's acted really well, and the pacing is really good, so I highly recommend checking this one out. Next up, let's talk about 1BR, which is a 2020 movie. It came out this year as well. It also was recently added to Netflix, and I can't tell you how many of you have asked me to talk about this movie, or at least watch it and share my thoughts. 1BR follows a young woman who moves to LA into what seems to be the perfect apartment in the perfect building and community. She soon learns of the consequences for breaking the rules and just how close everyone in the community really is. This movie's gonna be kind of hard to explain without spoiling anything, although Netflix also shows a preview. It's not, again, a spoiler because it does kind of happen Not really in the beginning of the movie, but early enough on where it's not a spoiler. But obviously we see her like being punished for breaking the rules in the preview. So it is kind of intriguing because when you read the description and hear about it, you're like, I don't understand what's going on in this scene because you don't obviously know the context. So I'll say this much, it's not as simple of a movie of her just having like weird neighbors. It's not just about the weird neighbors. There's so much more going on. This movie does take a little bit of time to build the plot and get to like the action, not even action, the more suspenseful parts, the more disturbing parts. It takes a little while to get there to build the story, which I don't hate because the way they did it is entertaining, but it's something to think about. The beginning could possibly be seen as a little bit slow to some of you. And while there are parts that are harder to watch, this honestly didn't get as disturbing and gory as I thought it was going to. I mean, it is, I think, described more of a drama horror than just horror, which the horror, in my opinion, is kind of lacking, which is hard to say because the horror that's in it is pretty disturbing if you've seen it. Like, it's not a beginner horror movie, but it's just there's few and far between scenes of actual genuine horror moments. So I just wish there was a lot more horror in this movie, and it's very much more plot-based than your standard horror movie, if there is such a thing. I don't even know what a standard horror movie is, but you know, it's more plot-based than horror-based, if that makes any sense. I don't know. I'm such a great reviewer, aren't I? There is kind of an interesting twist in the end, which I struggle calling it that because I kind of suspected it. It's not even like a huge reveal. It's called a twist, but it's like I kind of saw it coming. I don't know, and I think a lot of you will have as well, but it may surprise some of you. I don't know. There is some interesting plot points towards the end that are like, whoa. So again, another decent horror movie that was recently added to Netflix that I think you should check out. It's more drama than horror, more plot-based. It does take a while to build up the story, but I was never bored, and I do feel like it is an interesting, like an entertaining and original movie at least, so definitely still recommend. All right, now we're gonna get on to Deerskin, otherwise known as Le Dime. I don't know how to say that. Again, 2020 movie. This is done by Quentin Dupieux. I don't know French, sorry. This is actually the same director that brought us Rubber and Reality. I haven't seen Rubber yet. I've heard things about Rubber. I know it's kind of weird. Reality is really good though. I like Reality, and this movie, Le Dime, or Deerskin in English, I guess, is a horror comedy movie. So Deerskin follows a recent divorcee who decides to give up his old life and move to a quiet French village after purchasing a jacket that has strange supernatural powers. This causes him to spend his life savings and turn to crime in an attempt to appease the jacket. He is mistaken for a filmmaker in a bar by a woman who is an aspiring editor, and they team up to make a movie together. Now this is a weird movie. Very weird, and definitely not going to be for everyone. Generally, I think the comedy is good in this movie. It lands okay. It's not like the funniest movie in the world, but it does add to the movie, I think, because without it, it would have just been like a really bizarre movie. This isn't even a horror movie, I'm gonna say that. It's definitely not a horror movie. I mean, if you've seen Quentin Dupieux's, Dupois, I don't know. If you've seen his other movies, you know that they're not for everyone. They're weird. I think sometimes it's weird for weirdness sake. I think this concept, although it's very well executed, well acted, the acting is phenomenal in this, it's just weird. There's not a lot going on in the movie because it's just bizarre. I mean, the jacket is telling the character that it must be the only jacket to exist, to ever be worn again. It's the only jacket. And it's just, how did he come up with that? How did he think of that movie? But it's entertaining. Like, you hear that and you're like, what the hell is that? And that alone is like comedy, right? Because it's just so bizarre when you're watching and the jacket's like, I want to be the only jacket in the world. And you're like, what the? And honestly, the story doesn't feel that out of place when you're watching the movie. It sounds really bizarre, and it's, you know, going to appeal to a very specific audience, but it honestly doesn't feel that bizarre when you're watching it. It's definitely more of a strange kind of comedy, like a bizarre comedy, than a horror movie. You don't really see much in the ways of gore or anything like that. There are some scenes that could be considered like horror elements, but probably more like not even thriller, because this movie is just not scary. Like, none of it is scary at all. Now, I was interested in it the whole time, but I was very disappointed when the credits just started rolling. I was like, wait, that's it? I felt like it was building up to something, and it just didn't go anywhere. Like, it didn't end, like, there was no ending. Like, literally, there's like no ending. So I just want to put that warning out there that it will just end on you, and you do not expect that that's going to be the ending. The credits just start going, and so you're like, oh, okay, I guess. I almost debated even talking about this movie on my channel, because it's like, it's not a horror, it's very bizarre, and no one asked for it. No one has talked about this movie at all, but it's just such a weird one that I feel like I wanted to talk about it in case some of you end up really liking it, because it is a really well done movie. So we didn't have any negativity really in this video. That's a first. Usually when I do these 4 movies in one video there's usually 1 or 2 or all that I don't like, but this so far has been a good time to watch horror, so I've been pretty happy with it. Let's hope it continues into September and October, because I am expecting some great things coming out soon, so stay tuned. I think I'll just do like formal reviews for the upcoming releases. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on all 4 of these movies if you've seen them down below, and yeah, let me know what you want me to review next, whether individual or grouped like this. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.